Okay, next up we have Conrad talking about art and technology.
And how that small technological advances have helped to forward art. And I know that this is a really broad subject, so I have to apologize for the fact that I'm having to skim over massive amounts of history in order just to cover tiny topics. So, okay, go ahead. So a bit about myself. I play in a band called And You Will Know Us by the Trail of Dead. And touring has allowed me to travel and indulge in one of my favorite hobbies, which is going to art museums and thinking about how art progresses and how technology has done this. And we might define art as any device meant to make a specific task easier. We think of computers and appliances and spaceships as technology, but even simple technologies that we take for granted were great advances for their time, like pencils and paper and even tin cans. Thanks to our imagination, technologies are often creatively repurposed. In other words, used in ways that they were not originally intended. Numerous examples of this include the stereo sound, which was originally intended for telephones. Slinky toys were meant for stabilizing sensitive equipment on ships. Frisbees were pie plates, and vibrators were developed to cure hysterics. So one of the most important technological leaps in art was oil painting. And this was used in Asia since the 5th century, and oils were used in Europe since the 13th century, but they were slow to dry. And Jan van Eyck is accredited with discovering the fast-drying formula that led to the creation of strong hues that changed the way that we perceived art. Because old methods of tempera planing had this flat quality to them that, because tempera can't be layered, layering gives oils their depth, and as a result, this realism. And it's this added dimension of realism that pushed for greater realism in painting. And so we see the progression of flat art of the Middle Ages to the dramatic art of the Renaissance and the Romanticism. And another development was use of canvas over wood panels. In the Middle Ages, most painting was done on either wood or right on the walls, and painting on canvas was cheaper and more transportable. And this revolution was spearheaded in Venice, where ship sails and canvases were easily available, and it allowed art to reach a wider audience, and in particular the emerging middle class. Similar advances were being made at the time in music, such as the piano. In 1700s, the harpsichord maker, Bartolomeo Cristofori, wanted to meet the demand for a harpsichord with dynamic expression. And dynamic simply means the range between soft and loud. And harpsichords didn't really have this, because a harpsichord is made by a plectrum plucking a string, and it gives it that twang. And a piano is made by a hammer hitting a string. And this approach gives players this ability to play soft and delicately, and also really loud and grandiose. And it's said that the father of Western music, J.S. Bach, was not originally convinced of the piano's playability. His keyboard compositions have this austere, mechanical, harpsichord-like quality. And his dynamics don't come from playing soft and loud as much as the number of voices that he stacked on top of one another. However, Mozart grew up with the piano, and he created a slightly more dynamic style of the instruments. But his use of the piano still shared an emotional reserve that was typical of the composers that he'd been tutored by. And it really wasn't Ludwig van Beethoven who took the dynamic expression to the extreme, and he created compositions of an emotional, romantic range for the instrument that were comparable to the depth of the oil paintings that were being made at the time as well. And it's true that Beethoven cultivated a reputation for breaking the keys and the strings on the piano. However, I had a rare opportunity to actually play one of these pianos from Beethoven's time, and they are very delicate instruments. They feel kind of like a matchbox, and they would break. So the modern piano that we know is a product of years of development that were made to meet the demands of Beethoven's style in a way. Another invention that was to eventually change music was a saxophone. In 1840, the clarinet player Adolphus Sax wanted to develop a bass clarinet that could compete in volume with the brasses and be as versatile as a woodwind. And he did this by applying new methods of precision joint making. And the saxophone struggled to find acceptance until in 1920, Coleman Hawkins adapted the instrument into the jazz idiom, and the saxophone's unique ability to project and be harmonically versatile would eventually spearhead this jazz sound. And this is a great example of an imaginatively repurposed musical invention. The 19th century also saw the rise of the novel as an art form, and advances in industrial printing allowed literature to be put in the hands of everyday public. Now, this is easy to take for granted, but we have to remember that this revolution is taking place right now because computers are allowing writers to publish independently and wrest the monopoly away from publishing houses. So it's interesting for us to look ahead and see how computers will foster creative output of the future. So you could try to imagine a 21st century prodigy, a Leonardo or Mozart, who's composing on a garage band and on an iPad, and then he paints in brushes, and then he writes a novel on pages. It's almost like we could rewire our brains to go from one task to the next, and computers allow us to do this. One program that I've watched develop over the years is Photoshop. Now, this was originally intended as a tool for touching up digital images, but it's actually turning into a medium of its own, and it allows painters to paint with infinite layers and create alternate realities with unprecedented ease. And music, electronics revolutionized sound. Electric guitars and amplification epitomized the 60s rock revolution in the ways that synthesizers and drum machines defined music of the 80s and onwards. And now sequencers are making digital recording capable of surpassing traditional tape medium, much to the dismay of purists. Applications are currently being invented faster than developers know how they're going to be used by the people that are using them. Sculpture is a string simulator in Logic that is actually a great random noise generator. And Alchemy is a painting program which actually creates random images that allows artists to draw inspiration from accidents. So for those who are fundamentally opposed to progress, you have to remember that technological advances are not only inevitable, but artistically fruitful. And art thrives when technology is allowed to soar. In my own experience, I've seen many music producers who were once analog purists capitulate to the advantage of digital recording. So in conclusion, this marriage of art and technology is a very successful one, and we have the fortune of living in a time where, thanks to computers, technology is advancing faster than we can come up with ways to apply it. And thanks to an unchecked human population expansion, there are more artists now than ever. Thank you.
Any questions for Professor Conrad here? How do you like to make art?
That's a way broad, very broad question. I like to use computers. But I also like analog, you know? So I think that it's the marriage of the analog and computers that really gives, like for instance, it's great to work on a word processor, but when I'm coming up with ideas, it's so important to have a pencil and a pen and just like draw things on paper. So I think that one of the great things about living in this age where there's both is that you get to understand how important both are, that they're indispensable, that they, you know, they allow us this massive range of creativity.
I like how your iPad's interfering with the mic.
Oh, yeah. There we go. There's the iPad.
So I come from a classical musician background. I have a question myself. And one of the things that was really interesting for me was this article in the paper about how they had a digital orchestra, and music critics couldn't tell the difference between the digital orchestra and the human orchestra recordings. And what, as a musician, your biggest worry is, are you replaced in that sense? And what is the role for the live performance if everything is digitalized and pre-recorded?
That's a good question. I would actually have to hear that digital orchestra. I could imagine that it could be taught to play exactly the same way. I don't know if it could be taught to improvise, and that's one of the wonderful things about being a human, is just making things up on the spot and adapting to a situation, you know, spontaneously. But I'm also not saying that a computer could not be taught to do that as well. So we are in danger of being replaced, but maybe not anytime soon. You have a question, Sam? Oh, the question was, do computers make art, put art in danger of being commodified and make it too easy to make? And actually, I wrote a paper once called "The Death of the Enlightened Amateur," in a way that there was once a time where everyone was kind of an amateur at something, you know, and it was kind of like an okay thing to be. But now, like, you're in this world where everyone becomes an artist. That last article was just printed in CNN 2 days ago, and it does address that topic of like what happens when everyone becomes like an Instagram artist and we all become artists. And I would say that that's actually a good problem. I mean, wouldn't you? I mean, wouldn't we want to live in a world where everyone's an artist of some sort or another? Whether that you know, that kind of sets the standard for like really good art, like amazing art, higher in a way, you know. So I guess we'll see, because I think that is actually happening right now. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Conrad.